So hello and welcome back to Modern Papists. I'm here with John Melasan. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Melanson. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's as close as it gets. It's all
Okay.
good. We're in Cajun country.
Yeah, and so we're going to be talking about science and the scientific method, as well as the history of the church in relation to it. I know it's kind of like a beaten horse in some areas of the internet, but in a lot of areas, people still have this misrepresentation of the relationship with science and religion, and we thought we'd uh, fill that out a little bit here. But first, I want to introduce John. John.
Yeah, so a little bit of what I do. My name is John Melanson. I run Ferrite Productions, and I run Project 101, which is the channel. We're kind of just starting out. We've released 4 or 5 videos at this point. I've got them done. I'm in the release process at the moment. But basically, it just talks about the church and its relationship to science, and then scientifically verified miraculous events. My background, my father is an engineer and a lawyer, and my mother is a practicing scientist, and both are deeply religiously Catholic. So this has always just been a subject that's been kind of brewing in the back of my head for probably most of my life.
Okay, good. So like you would be talking about like historical people, like any that come to mind that you could just give an example that people may not know.
Yeah, so right off the bat, of course, the scientific method begins in the Middle Ages. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think the sciences begin during the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, and they begin with Bishop Grosseteste, who is the first person to conduct a scientific experiment. That's back in the 12th century, and then his student, Father Roger Bacon, or Brother Roger Bacon, who is the really kind of the birth of the scientific method. Grosseteste also writes, I believe that the work is on lines, graphs, and angles.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is the person that really says, hey, there are these observations, we can put statistics to them, and we can graph said statistics, which is, just huge. It just sets the basis for how we look at math in its relationship to real-time events that we're viewing.
Okay, so from the get-go, and I think that's an important note here. Science is actually birthed within the church.
Yes, 100%. There is almost no historical argument that can be made otherwise.
Okay, so I guess like because like right now there's this understanding, obviously, most circles, science versus religion, or which one matters more, blah blah blah. And I think that's kind of like a red herring. It's not real. It's not something that the perspective seems off, and the way it's been sold to us. Especially in public school, where I went. I don't remember if you went to public school or not, but yes. Public school up in Michigan, it's just kind of under the rug. And aside from maybe like 1 or 2 teachers that bring up, how Kepler believed in, God and used it in his studies, or mentioned it in his studies, you don't really have this understanding that scientists that were basically pillars of what we know today believed in anything besides what they worked on.
So that happens for a few reasons. I see Catholics and other Christians who are trying to do history kind of tackle this with like tinfoil hats. So they'll come in and they'll go, oh, well, there's been this secret conspiracy that atheists have been trying to move these people out of the sciences. And it's really as simple as, what language are you speaking and what country do you live in? So okay. That's probably about 50% of the battle, right? So like, for instance, if I were looking at who found calculus, right? Is it Desluce? Is it Leibniz? Is it Pascal? Or is it Newton? Now, everybody in the English-speaking world is going to say, well, Newton, he founded calculus. Right. If you're German, it's Leibniz. If you're French, it's Pascal. And if you are Italian, it's Father Desluce. So you could make an argument that a Catholic priest founded calculus. It just depends on where you are. And so a lot of the anti-scientific rhetoric comes from British imperialism. And then we in the States just kind of get that you know, because Britain ruled half the world for a while, you know, roughly.
Right.
And so the British story is often the one that's told. So for instance, people with vowels at the end of their names, you're just not going to get their side of history.
Okay, so you're saying it's more of just a bias of where you're born. So like I guess you could look at Dawkins. I guess that's an interesting point. So like Dawkins will say like
Richard Dawkins is about as English as it gets.
Well, right, but it's very interesting here because he'll say, you know, whatever religion you are is based off primarily where you live, which there is some truth to that in terms of locations, but it seems like in this case, when it comes to what you just said, like science also has that same bias with who champions what and with what perspective.
Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and then who's the other little one, the angry one? Christopher Hitchens. Yeah, they're all
the late. I'm gonna have to say the late Christopher Hitchens because he's
they're all English or American, and that's not you know a mistake by any stretch of the imagination. And so you know, for instance, like Italian history, you know, you pasteurize things, you don't Spallanzani things, right? Even though Spallanzani, right? So pasteurizing is you know heating a liquid to the point that you're getting rid of the you're getting rid of all the bacteria in it, and then you're hermetically sealing it, which actually comes from the word to hermit. It's actually a religious term. It was coined by Pasteur because in England, I mean, and Pasteur was a great scientist, did a lot of things, but he did not come up with the process of pasteurizing. That was Spallanzani, and he named it hermetically sealing something after hermits, after his religious tradition. So even you can even hear the old wordage, right? The cell, I mean, is named after the monk's cell. And so there are a lot of these discoveries that are happening because science is a team sport, right? So it's really hard. You'll get these names like the father of, the inventor of, the discoverer of, and those terms really don't mean a lot other than this person made a major contribution to the sciences. So like even things like who invented what, right? Inventions, my dad as a lawyer will tell you, inventions are a patent race. They're not an originality race.
Right? Absolutely.
So, otherwise, Edison would not be credited with 99% of the things that he did.
Right.
You know, and so it's one of those things where I think it's really easy to make it an us versus them thing, and I really think it's a cultural thing that makes it easy, right? Because it's very easy to say, well, I'll just credit the least religious person of the group, right? So it's kind of like have you ever heard this? The founding fathers were all deists.
Yep, I've heard that several times.
Right, I heard that growing up in school, and it's just not true. They're a mixed group of various, and then even the deists thing. So like, let's say Jefferson didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, but he read the Bible every day. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like I do. So muddy. It's like, is he a Christian? Well, he followed all Christian teachings, but then he was also didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. I mean, and so it's kind of like Newton. I mean, Newton had some crazy ideas about, you know, religion, but he read his Bible all the time, and he wrote his science as theology.
Well, he was also like a fringe Protestant group in time in England.
Yes.
Yeah. So he wasn't like in an Anglican or something. I think he actually wouldn't even be considered a Trinitarian.
No, but probably not. That's. And I don't get super into the weeds with his personal beliefs, but people think he's like an impersonal deist, and they'll make that argument. And it's not true. I mean, Martin Luther King had some really weird views about Christianity, but I would never not consider him a Christian. So what kind of happens with history is that you look backwards with a lens of, well, if somebody claimed to be Christian, they probably either just didn't have enough information, and if they had known what we know now, they obviously wouldn't follow their faith.
I've heard that so many times. Like, there's this,
Yeah.
well, that was the fashionable thing at the time. And it was like, it's not a fashion.
Well, then great. Atheism is now the fashionable thing of the time.
Well, right. Yeah. It just
right.
undermines their point.
Yeah.
That is such a good point. I've never thought of it that way.
Right. Well, and the sciences right now. So for a lot of my projects, I've had to interview a lot of doctors, and they run fairly parallel to the sciences. And so one of the physical therapists that I interviewed, doctorate in physical therapy, had been working in it for 4 years, and I said, doctors are more likely to be religious than the general population. And he said, yes, that's true. And I said, why is it that the Mayo Clinic has so few Christian members? And he said, to be honest with you, it's that academia. He said, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic. I'm here to help you with your project. I would never mention my faith to my professors. They would beat me down if I did. So I don't. Yeah. And I mean, when I was in business school, but I always took an interest in the sciences, and I interviewed a lot of professors, and they would go, oh, you're Christian, here, let me help you. And they would give me a book on why evolution is truth, which from a philosophical standpoint, it just doesn't hold water as a title. But they would hand me these books, and I would say, oh, I'm Catholic. My mom did evolutionary biology as her major. As the paper for her major, on the evolution of the straightening of the human spine. And he said, what?
Yeah.
And it was like, he had
totally
no idea. And I'm like, you're a professor of science. And he said, well, no scientist I've ever met is Christian. And I was like, they probably just didn't tell you. And it's the in vogue thing. It's the problem.
Right. And it creates their own little bubble. Like, their whole little bubble group of people, they don't believe, or they feign that they don't believe. And then, like, they meet someone like your mom, and they're like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, I've never heard of that before. And it's like, I mean, these also seem to be, because I kind of know what it is. I have a graduate degree, and I've met these people, and I've had similar discussions. And it's like, for people who kind of claim that, these also tend to be the same people who say they have an open mind. Yes. But then, like, it floors them, and it's like, that's not really being open-minded. Like,
well, right. And that's the difficulty whenever you're discussing these things, is that you have so much ground to make up. Yeah. Because the history is just not there. Like, if I told you, like, probably the greatest inorganic chemist alive right now reads his Bible for 2 hours a day, like, he's an extremely religious person, to the point that it's almost borderline fanatical, and he's designing microcars, and he's going to be rebuilding the interior of the human ear artificially. I mean, there are Christians in the sciences that just blow you away, and unless they come out publicly, you don't know them. There's a great book on this, God's Mechanics, and it's particularly a play on words. It's by Brother Guy Consolmagno, who talks about this a lot. And then the author, I think he passed away in the 50s, James J. Walsh. He writes books like 13th Century, the Greatest of All Centuries, you know, where he just reframes the entirety of your view of history from a Catholic perspective. And it's like, oh my God, how could you see it any other way?
Right. And so, like, yeah, there's just so much right there with what you just said. Like, I don't even know where to go.
Yeah, Thomas Woods is another great professor for that, a historian.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down. Thomas Woods. Well, I guess I don't need, because this is recorded, so we're good.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
I don't know why. Whatever. Like, I don't want to feign whatever. But I am interested, because this is like the stuff, you know, because I think about, you know, how am I going to raise my kids? You know, how are you going to raise your kids when it comes to this context? I mean, you're making videos. You just be like, hey, watch my videos, guys. But, like,
I don't know that my kids are going to be interested in. I mean, I've got a 10-month-old, but I don't even know if when she's old enough she's going to be interested in watching her dad talk. But
well, yeah, I guess. I mean, I understand that, but it's just like one of those things where we are so inoculated with, like, religion and science are separated, and it's like, at the end of the day, science is a tool.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things to me whenever you're trying to understand the sciences, I make a statement to people whenever I'm talking about these subjects that kind of knocks down one pin for them is or one domino for them is I'll say there are scientific facts that are not facts. And that gets under their skin a little bit, right? Because I can say I can conduct an experiment and get the results I want, and it is not factually accurate. And they go, well, yeah, I say, okay, we use George Ernst Stahl as an example. George Ernst Stahl was a precursor to chemistry before Latreille, who he had a theory that whenever you burn something, there was a substance in it called phlogiston, and that as you burned it, that phlogiston was torn away into the air, right, and eliminated. And people said, well, I don't know if that's true or not. And he said, well, let me show you an experiment. I bet you that if I burn a piece of wood and weigh it before and after, there will actually be a difference in the weight, right? Before I burn it and after I burn it. And so after he burns it, he would take it and weigh it, and it weighed less. And he said, well, I can actually give you down to the gram how much phlogiston is in this object. I can give you the composition of phlogiston for every single burnable item on the planet. I can tell you how much phlogiston is in oil. I can tell you how much phlogiston is in gas. I can tell you how much phlogiston is in wood. Anything that burns, I can give you an accurate scientific reading of how much phlogiston is in it. Now, he didn't have Latreille's understanding of elements being bonded together and breaking down those bonds, but he presented a scientific fact that was a scientific fact for 200 years. It just wasn't real. And so science is framed by the questions that you're willing to ask and the answers you're willing to accept. So whenever people come and say, well, this science says, or this experiment says, or this thing says, it's like, hold on. What are the data points? And let's walk all the way back and talk about it.
Right.
Because otherwise, and I do this in my video with like any political issue. If you look up any political issue and goes, what's the science on this? Or proof this is real, or proof this is fake. Everybody will say that the science backs whatever their position is.
Right. Well, so like you bring up a very good point though, like from a philosophical point, like facts by definition are falsifiable. Meaning if there's, and I think that really doesn't settle with people. Like, we're breathing oxygen right now, and it's a fact that, oxygen is something that sustains our body and we need it every few minutes. But that fact can be shown to be not true.
Sure.
And
we could be breathing the nitrogen that's in the air. It's more
right. And it's just, it depends on how sophisticated like we get in understanding and being able to observe these things. So
sure.
It really, what is it? Like that doesn't sit well with people, but what they'll say is, at least I think very wisely, is like, to a certain extent, they say like, well, I'm just going to go with what I know. And I think you've said that in a conversation before, like, this is what the evidence suggests. And so like, it's just the idea of you have to put a limit to human knowledge because we have limits.
Yes, no, and that's definitely true, I think, to a certain extent. I would say that you come at facts from and I'm going to use a big old scary word, phenomenologically. So you say, okay, I see that the science points this direction. Does my personal experience point this direction? Does what I know about X, Y, and Z point this direction? Because whenever we're looking at an issue, so I'll give you another example, great example. And this one's a terrifying example of where people said, well, science just says this, and it was to the contrary of rational human reasoning, was in the rise of, say, something like eugenics, right? So in the after Darwin came along, and really Darwin believed in eugenics. A lot of people want to distance him from it, but there's no argument that he didn't believe in selective breeding. His own brother-in-law was the guy who founded social Darwinism. So I mean, if he was preaching one thing, then obviously he just didn't share it with the family. Right. But anyway, no, there was a lot of there was the story of, say, like Otabenga in the Bronx Zoo, where he was there was a pygmy boy that was taken to the Bronx Zoo to live there as an animal. And they said, well, you know, evolutionarily, he's different from a human. He doesn't have human rights, even though he could talk. And so, you know, everything, they said, well, he's a lesser species. But there was a subcurrent of evolutionary thinking at the time that said that different humans evolved from different apes, right? So that functionally speaking, like the different races, like you were Native American, you evolved from X ape. You were Black, you evolved from X ape. You were Asian, you evolved from X ape. You know, whatever these primordial species that they had. And so there was an argument by some of the curators at the Bronx Zoo, from a purely scientific perspective, that you could cage Native Americans and that it was okay because they really didn't have human rights. You could cage African tribesmen and they really didn't have human rights. And it was the Black pastors of New York that were coming out and saying, hey, look, this is wrong. Right. And the response to them was, oh, you silly, silly Christians, you just don't get science. It's okay. It's all right. You'll catch up eventually. Like, you know, you're a pedantic, stupid person. And now it would horrify us in modern times, but eugenics captured the ideas of like Nikola Tesla, Alexander Graham Bell, Margaret Sanger. Like these weren't, or Wollstonecraft, one of the founders of feminism. It wasn't a niche idea. There were 60,000 people in the United States that were sterilized. But anybody who looked at Ota Benga from a religious perspective, from a humanist perspective, from any other perspective could go, well, no, he's got all the faculties of being human. Let's look at it philosophically. And they said, no, science says this. Throw your philosophy, throw your religion, throw everything, get it out of here.
Right. And I think that's the worst part. And I think I think that is some people will say it's the best part of the Enlightenment, but I actually think that's the worst part, is when you don't give context to a tool, like science, when you don't put it in the perspective of ethics, you end up with something like that. Like modern day, you know, I think most of us know about embryonic stem cell research. We are, you know, where we are literally taking we're creating human beings in a petri dish for the purpose of killing them, to then learn how it benefits us who are currently alive. Like, that is ridiculous. But that's what happens when you don't have morals of, you know, applied to what you're using. You know, like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I mean, you get the difference between a butcher and a murderer with a knife is what they end up using, you know, like using the knife on. And so, like, that's, you know, I think that's very apt to say here, because we are literally killing thousands, if not millions, of people yearly for embryonic stem cell research, which has yielded almost nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And so, like, gosh, like that story of in the Bronx, like that is just, that doesn't go down.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it gets worse, because the religious figures eventually got him out of there, and he never could adapt to society and killed himself.
Right. And you know,
I mean,
what's weird about that part is that people will say, well, science would say that because we conditioned him and stuff. It's like, well, no, that's not, like, they treat science as like a god.
Yes.
Like, in dictating or justifying certain facts, when it's actually just, well, this is what we have written down and understand, given the principles that we've learned through a series of time.
Experimentation. Yeah, sure. Well, and then that comes back to the point originally. If you condition someone to live in a cage and tell everyone around him that he's subhuman, from a psychological perspective, that makes it awfully hard to integrate into society. Right. I mean, he was told he was an animal for almost a decade, and then, you know, and it's just it's just so common sense. It's like, they're just common sense things that if you come at life with just one lens, which is a scientific lens, there's certain things you can't see, right? And science is subject to your way of thinking, your philosophy, your politics, you know, whatever it is. that makes you want to view certain facts. I love, there was a great Bill Burr jokes where he goes, yeah, so I think something, so I go to imright.com, and then he says something along the lines of like, you know, if you own a pool, you're 15 times more likely to drown. And he said, well, no duh, because how are you going to drown at your house without a pool? Like, it doesn't mean that everybody who owns a pool is just out there drowning. It's, you know, if you own a gun, you're 20 times more likely to have a firearm incident. It's like, well, yeah, I would assume. I mean, God, you know, and so there's always a way to interpret data, you know, favorably to whatever you want it to say.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, people make those jokes about statistics, like, you know, you can make statistics say whatever you want. That's the heart of what most well, actually, I would argue most studies that mean anything practically require statistics. So I absolutely agree with you. But I do think we are running short on time. So
sure.
I just want to say thank you very much for having this discussion. You know, I've learned a lot, like, and it was really enjoyable. Like most of our discussions, it was very enjoyable. And I hope everyone who's watching also has enjoyed this conversation. What was the channel that you're at again, John?
So I'm Project 101. It's 101 scientifically verified miracles is where that name comes from. Because we'll have presented those, I think, within the next 2 years is how we're going to lay all those out. And then I do work with clerical scientists, and at the time that this will be coming out, we'll have released basically a history guide to all the clerical scientists that runs about 30 minutes.
Okay, that sounds yeah, I am very glad you're doing this, because that is something I think is very needed to give context to the Christian world in relation to the history of science in a succinct manner. I think that's awesome. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and sorry, I just
no, it's all good.
So I guess thank you for joining us, and you know, I wish you the best with your channel.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
All right.
Bye.